The air was electric as the room filled with anticipation. Inside the ornate walls of the Capitol, the echoes of history reverberated through Hearing Room 4A. It was Wednesday morning, and the day had dawned dry and sharp, echoing the high stakes that lay ahead. Crowded with citizens, advocates, press members, and legislators, every seat was taken. People lined the gallery, eager to witness a crucial congressional hearing on racial bias in America's criminal justice system. Outside, the sun shone brightly, while inside, the atmosphere simmered with tension. Cameras were positioned strategically along the walls, capturing every nuance for those gathered at home, ready to see if justice in the United States was genuinely blind or simply a facade for systemic failures. On one side of the long table sat Jasmine Crockett, a fierce black congresswoman from Texas and former criminal defense attorney, who bore the weight of many stories in her heart. She wore a tailored navy blue suit, her back straight, projecting confidence and authority. With over 100 courtroom victories under her belt, Jasmine wasn't just there to speak. She was prepared to illuminate the uncomfortable truths that had been too long in the shadows. Opposite her was Andrea Williamson, the former Attorney General of Florida, impeccably polished, exuding an air of unyielding power. Williamson's background was steeped in tough-on-crime policies that had often overlooked the rights of black defendants, earning her accolades from conservative circles but ire from civil rights groups. Today, however, the tables were poised to turn. The chairman of the committee, an older man with a voice like gravel, briefly addressed the attendees before nodding toward Jasmine to begin. Her pulse quickened. She was ready to confront the reality that had been neglected for far too long. "Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee," she began, her voice calm yet firm. "Today, I'm here to speak on behalf of those who have faced injustice, those whose voices have been systematically silenced." But before she could delve deeper, Williamson leaned forward, her voice smooth but dripping with disdain. "Maybe," she interrupted, a smirk dancing across her lips, "instead of trying to educate America on justice, you should go back to Africa and learn about your own history first." The declaration was like a grenade tossed into the room, silencing every chatter and drawing sharp gasps from the audience, eyes wide with shock. A thick silence enveloped the room, its weight palpable. The committee members exchanged glances, everyone acutely aware of the ugly undertones buried in Williamson's words. Jasmine remained still, a figure of composure, her hands resting gently on the table, assessing the atmosphere around her. After a moment that felt like an eternity, Jasmine raised her head slowly. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Her tone didn't carry anger, it was a request wrapped in determination. A clarion call demanding attention. "What exactly did you just say?" Williamson straightened up defiantly. "I said, if you think this country is unjust, perhaps you should spend your time elsewhere," she retorted, confidence laced with the belief that her words carried power. Jasmine took a deep breath, feeling the ancestral strength surge through her as she prepared to dismantle Williamson's insidious narrative. "Let me make this clear," she began, her voice steady and unwavering. "The land we stand on is my homeland. My family has fought to nurture and protect it long before your forebears arrived." With each word, Jasmine peeled away layers of Williamson's hostility, revealing the truth beneath the veneer of politeness. "My ancestors were not afforded the luxury of choice. They were torn from their roots and forced into a life of servitude, chained and shackled, subjected to unimaginable hatred." The audience began to lean in, drawn toward her words as Jasmine continued, her tone resolute. "While you may dismiss my narrative, it is not just my story. It is a collective testimony of every black individual that has stood where I stand, confronting the very bias that you seem to ignore." As the weight of her statement settled over the room, Jasmine grasped the document before her, opening it with care, revealing an analysis compiled by the Department of Justice. "This document outlines disparities in our justice system during your tenure," she said. Each eye was glued to her, ready to witness the evidence unfold. As Jasmine began to articulate the statistical evidence laid out in the document, the atmosphere shifted from hostility to solidarity. For the same crimes, black defendants were sentenced to, on average, 30% longer than their white counterparts. The disparities here are not mere coincidences. They are a reflection of systemic racism embedded in our judicial processes. The quietness in the room morphed, anticipation building. Williamson's bravado crept away, revealing cracks in her confidence. The flickering lights overhead seemed to dim with the heaviness of reality. This hearing is not just about individual mistakes. This is about centuries of injustice that we can no longer condone or ignore. Under your authority, thousands faced wrongful arrests, and yet you remained blind to the outcomes of your policies. Jasmine's voice rose slightly, the emotion simmering underneath each syllable. Between 2015 and 2020, black individuals accounted for 79% of wrongful convictions, she continued, pacing slightly before the table, the pages of the document flipping with practiced ease. Each statistic represents a life torn apart, a family disrupted, a community stripped of justice. The audience's fascination turned toward fear. Williamson struggled to find her voice, a fortress of former power now crumbling around her. Jasmine seized the moment, pressing forward. While this data may represent numbers for you, it represents flesh and blood to me. It embodies the resilience of my ancestors, who fought against being rendered invisible. You speak of laws and orders, but I see a broken system, one that must be challenged. The energy surged as Jasmine's determination ignited consciousness within the committee. Muffled whispers of acknowledgement spread like wildfire through the audience, the ripples forming connections to profound truths that could no longer remain buried. Building on her momentum, Jessica continued reading snippets from the report, shattering the complacency that had festered among the members. Look at the historical patterns. Violence against our communities framed as necessary precautions against crime. This was not just neglect, this was intentional. Every word added weight to the collective realization within the chamber. Williamson squared her shoulders, attempting to respond, but Jasmine's steady gaze silenced her. The truth doesn't require bravado. The truth stands on its own. And today, we acknowledge that our voices must resonate beyond these walls. At this moment, Jasmine wasn't merely testifying, she was sowing the seeds for action. I am here to shed light on the hypocrisy of policies that have long privileged a specific demographic at the expense of everyone else's rights, she declared. Ignoring this inequity will no longer be an option, and as we enter the future, we must carry these truths forward. It is our duty to reform, to ensure that dignity and justice are not meted out selectively but uniformly. With each moment that passed, the tension morphed into a collective realization of accountability not just imposed on Williamson but shared by all present. Finally, Jasmine closed the document, the finality palpable. Today, you have an opportunity to recommit to equity, to recognize the harm done, and work towards rectifying this injustice. As silence enveloped the room, its gravity hung heavy like accumulated weight finally freed from the bonds of inaction. Outside the hearing room, the assignment of implications for Jasmine's words churned through the media channels. Clips circulated like wildfire, her poised demeanor contrasting sharply with Williamson's fading bravado. News networks ignited, dissecting the highlights of the passionate exchange, catalyzing conversations throughout households. Viewers, while captivated, began to grapple with their own parts in perpetuating biases, unwrapping long-held notions that bolstered privilege. Jasmine's testimony rapidly ignited discussions across social media platforms. Users shared experiences, stories of injustice that had too long been hushed. Whether from students in classrooms or parents chatting over kitchen tables, dialogues sparked movements. People rallied, advocating for policies that would usher in comprehensive reforms, pushed by popular opinion inspired by Jasmine's powerful performance. Meanwhile, Williamson returned home, her thoughts fogged with confusion as she faced the enormous task of reconciling with herself internally. The day's exchanges haunted her mind like an undying echo. Jasmine's voice saturated her innermost thoughts. Her assistant entered, anxious to discuss strategies moving forward, but Williamson dismissed any conversation. "Give me some space." She had no appetite for responses, only the silence that engulfed her head held heavy with uncertainty. The day continued to swirl in her mind, but one moment persisted. Jasmine's direct challenge. "You're invited to join the conversation," Jasmine had said, as the committee nodded thoughtfully. Williamson had never anticipated that the day would lead to such a reckoning. As Jasmine returned to her office, the echoes of the hearing began to wrap around her. She felt energized, invigorated to enact change. The success of that moment went beyond mere dialogue. It was about transformation, not just policy but societal convictions. Days turned into weeks, and the buzz surrounding Jasmine's success in shifting the narrative did not wane. She received invitations from community organizations, educational institutions, and activist groups eager to hear her words and initiatives aimed at addressing racism and bias in various layers of society. Jasmine realized her work was far from over. It was imperative to engage the community, to record these discussions in schools and establish conversations in local outreach programs. The youth were mobilized, voices loud in ways that filled her with hope. Cities began to awaken to the need for equitable reforms as Jasmine grew more determined. Speaking across the nation, she maintained her original commitment to not only raise awareness but act on systemic injustices, telling her story while illuminating those around her. In the heart of a community center one evening, Jasmine found herself surrounded by young faces eager to listen, to learn, and to participate in the dialogue about racial disparities. She had returned to her roots, sitting among students who were ready to demand justice. "Let me tell you something," Jasmine began, her voice firm and inspiring. "Your voices matter. You have the capacity to change the landscape across this country. Just remember, your story is your power. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The engagement from the young audience was palpable. It surged like hope throughout the room. They became advocates for change, and Jasmine inspired them to push past societal constraints and embrace their roles as catalysts for reform. "Together, we can hold systems accountable," she continued. "We need to challenge the narratives fed to us, promote empathy over apathy, and stand united on issues that matter." Students rose with conviction, echoing sentiments of justice, promising to be activists not just in spirit but in action. Jasmine recognized the transformation unfolding before her eyes. These young voices would become the harbingers of change, nudging the future toward equity and understanding. As the months rolled on, Jasmine took a moment to reflect on the whirlwind of activity surrounding her life since that pivotal hearing. This was not just a personal journey but a collective one. She had ignited a movement, and now the work continued as transformation began to take root. The media continued to highlight her progress, and public interest grew as they watched her commitment to justice unfold. Jasmine showcased real stories and experiences from communities marginalized by biases, shaping narratives that had long been dismissed. Back in the Capitol, Williamson stood alone in her office, grappling with the remnants of Jasmine's assertions. She had once held unshakable confidence, but those foundations were swiftly eroding, her barriers of denial cracking. With a heavy heart, Williamson began to consider the real impact of her role. Isolation loomed over her, a stark contrast to how she once maneuvered through politics, now rendered helpless in the wake of Jasmine's testament. The enrollment of followers was declining, and community members began to speak out against imbalanced policies. As she sat in the silence of her office, Williamson confronted the reality that she must change, for the society she served, for the communities she neglected, and for the silence she had perpetuated. Months since the hearing, the conversation sparked by Jasmine's presence grew into a movement that rippled across the nation. Local chapters emerged, focused on racial justice, civil rights, and repairing the systemic fractures that previously paralyzed activism. People began to reflect on their histories, create discussions within their families, and establish justice initiatives aimed at fostering understanding and compassion. Jasmine's story became emblematic of the power of truth. It transcended the political theater and moved into the realm of personal growth. Schools across America began preaching Jasmine's teachings, not just in history lessons but in ways that allowed students to discover their voices. She was invited to address student bodies, connecting to the youth eager to become champions for justice themselves. Through countless testimonials, communities echoed her belief that silence would no longer suffice. Every rally, every speech garnered momentum, transforming frustration into hope for something better. People began to recognize that they too possessed the power to shape a future built on justice and equality. Armed with an enthusiastic spirit, Jasmine continued her journey of advocacy, a commitment to strengthening networks aimed at confronting injustice in every corner of the country. Soon enough, she was involved in collaborations that inspired profound changes in policy, drafting legislation so that the echoes of her words resonated far beyond the walls of Congress. An invitation to present at the United Nations would soon arrive, a testament to her growing influence around the world. The opportunity to advocate for systemic justice on an international stage further fueled her resolve to make the most of it. Days of reflection and growth propelled Jasmine forward with renewed energy. She reached out to former colleagues, allies, and community leaders, striving to create alliances that could usher monumental change in future laws and emerging policies. The nation began to wear a new lens, one with clarity that demanded acknowledgement and compassion. And as each moment slipped away, Jasmine knew this was just the beginning. Her voice would continue to ring with authenticity as a new chapter unfolded, one that would bridge divides and draw the lines of connection deeper. America, albeit slow to change, began to awaken to the truth it had shied away from for too long. Each step forward demanded collective effort, understanding, and care, a matrix that Jasmine committed to dismantling. Together, she and the growing masses embodied a narrative rewriting America's story, breathing life into the dreams of those whose voices had been stifled, demonstrating that change was, in fact, inevitable. Jasmine had ignited a fire, a beacon for what was to come. The journey for justice would not be concluded within the walls of Congress but carried forward by the people ready to stand firm, united, and unyielding. The narrative explores the themes of activism, the struggle for justice, and the challenges of confronting systemic failure, while highlighting the importance of speaking truth to power. It represents a call to action for individuals to engage and advocate for transformation, while emphasizing that change is possible when voices unite for a common cause.